Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something fundamental, how reliable our own minds actually are. We're focusing on memory and, how we make decisions.
Absolutely. And as you're going about your day, maybe prepping for something, learning, or just, well, thinking,
Yeah.
understanding these processes is pretty crucial.
Exactly. And the sources we've looked at really dig into this. Things like memory getting distorted, how emotions play a part, and all those mental shortcuts, biases too.
Uh-huh.
So the goal here is to unpack how much we can actually trust our internal world. So maybe the first question for you listening is, how much can you trust your own memories?
That's a great starting point because, well, the research is pretty clear. Memory isn't like hitting record on a camera.
Okay.
It's more reconstructive, like
Yeah.
building something again each time. Your brain fills in gaps, often based on what seems logical or what fits your existing beliefs.
So it's not just fading, it's actively being rebuilt.
Precisely. And that rebuilding process makes it open to, well, distortion, even from the get-go.
Right, the sources mentioned this can happen even as the memory is first being formed, like Bartlett's work.
Exactly. Bartlett and Brewer and Trans, too, showed that our expectations, what we already know, can shape how we even encode an event. We're not passive observers.
We're shaping it as it happens.
We are. So the key takeaway is memories aren't pure recordings. They're actively constructed, influenced by our knowledge and expectations right from the start.
That makes you think about those really vivid personal memories, doesn't it? Your first date, maybe, or, I know, your wedding day. We feel like those are crystal clear.
And they feel incredibly real, incredibly detailed. But because they are reconstructed, even those cherished memories, well, they're not immune.
So even those can
Yeah.
change. Subtly.
Over time, yeah. Details might shift slightly. The emotions attached can color the memory. Maybe later experiences even bleed into it, often without us realizing.
Wow. Okay, that has some pretty big real-world consequences, right? Like, eyewitness testimony. The source brought that up.
Oh, definitely. Eyewitness accounts have historically been seen as really strong evidence in court.
Yeah, you see it in movies all the time, the dramatic courtroom reveal.
But unfortunately, things like DNA technology have shown us something psychologists suspected for a long time.
That eyewitnesses can be wrong.
They can be, and sometimes are, mistaken. It's usually not about lying, it's just the fundamental fallibility of how memory works.
It is a bit unsettling, that realization. Before we go deeper into the research, the source had this inquiry section, like a thought experiment for it.
Yes, it's a great little exercise to get a feel for how memory can vary from person to person. It gives 3 prompts. Maybe you listening could take a second to think about one.
Okay, what are they?
All right, so the first one is, think about the first day of this school year.
Okay.
Or maybe try to describe a favorite teacher's classroom from elementary school.
Ooh, that's a good one.
The third option is, describe a field trip you went on in, say, the last year or so.
So just pick one and picture it.
Yeah, just take a moment, maybe mentally jot down a few details. What do you see? What stands out?
Trying the classroom one, I can picture, like the posters. But yeah, I'm already wondering if I'm just filling in blanks.
And that's exactly the point. The original activity involved people writing these down and then comparing notes.
To see the differences.
Exactly. Even for something people experienced together, their individual memories would show these, variations. It really highlights the reconstructive nature we were talking about.
Okay, so memory isn't a perfect recording. It's rebuilt.
Yeah.
Now, the sources also talked about why we forget things, and Freud came up.
Yes, Sigmund Freud. He had this idea about forgetting, particularly for really emotional or traumatic events. He called it repression.
Right, repression. Can you unpack that a bit more? What was his theory?
So Freud suggested that when we face something really distressing, our minds have these defense mechanisms. Repression is one where the mind basically pushes the difficult memory out of conscious awareness.
Into the unconscious.
Into the unconscious, yeah. The idea was, even though you don't consciously remember it, it could still bubble up and influence you, maybe through dreams or, unexplained anxieties.
Okay, that sounds like it connects to the whole recovered memory debate. That's been controversial, especially in therapy settings.
It absolutely connects. Now, it's vital to acknowledge that terrible things like abuse definitely happen, but researchers like Elizabeth Loftus, a cognitive psychologist, raised some really important questions.
About the reliability of those recovered memories?
Exactly. Her point wasn't to deny abuse, but to suggest that some memories recovered later, maybe during therapy, might have been unintentionally shaped or even created by information or suggestions introduced after the original event.
So not deliberate fabrication, But memory's malleability coming into play again.
Precisely. Loftus's work consistently showed how suggestible memory can be, how post-event information can warp recollections, even significant ones, which led her to ask, could you implant an entirely false memory?
And that's the Lost in the Mall study. Yeah, I remember hearing about that one.
The very one. Loftus and Pickerel, 1995. They specifically set out to see if they could create a false autobiographical memory, a memory of something personal that never happened just through suggestion.
Okay, how do they actually do it? It sounds tricky.
Well, first they got participants, and this is key, they talked to their families.
To get real memories.
Yes, to get 3 actual childhood memories for each participant. And also, crucially, to confirm that the participant had never actually been lost in a shopping mall as a child.
Got it. So they had a baseline.
Exactly. Then participants got a little booklet with descriptions of 4 events, the 3 real ones and the fake Lost in the Mall story. They were asked to write down what they remembered about each, or just say if they didn't remember it.
And then interviews followed.
Yep, 2 interviews spread over about 4 weeks. In the interviews, they were encouraged to recall details for all 4 events and rate how confident they felt about each memory.
Okay, and the results. Did people buy the fake story?
It was pretty striking. About a quarter, 25% of the participants came to remember being lost in the mall. Some even provided details like who found them or what they were wearing.
Wow, 25%. That's significant.
It is. Now, it's important to add, they generally had less confidence in this false memory compared to the real ones.
Right.
And they usually wrote less about it in the initial booklet, so it wasn't always, a super vivid, detailed false memory.
But still, the fact that it could be implanted at all in a quarter of people just through suggestion.
That was a major finding. It showed that creating false autobiographical memories is possible, but Loftus also noted it didn't happen to everyone.
Right.
Which raises the next question. Why are some people perhaps more susceptible than others? The study didn't really answer that part.
Which leads nicely into the critical thinking questions raised in the source material about this study. Important points to consider.
Absolutely. Like ecological validity. How much does this controlled lab setting really mirror real life?
Yeah, being asked by a researcher is different from just remembering something, naturally.
Very different. Does it capture the complexity of how memories usually form and get recalled day to day? Probably not entirely.
That's a fair point.
What else? Ethics, naturally. Is it okay to try and implant a false, potentially distressing memory, even a relatively mild one like being lost?
Yeah, that's consideration.
And then there's the idea of demand characteristics.
What are those again?
It's basically, could the participants have sort of figured out what the researchers were hoping to find, even unconsciously?
Like picking up on subtle cues.
Exactly. Did they feel some pressure, maybe, to remember the mall story because it seemed important to the study? Even tiny signals from researchers can sometimes influence results.
Those are really good points. It shows that even famous studies need careful interpretation. Okay, so the focus then shifts in our sources, moving from memory to decision-making.
Right. And here, the word reliability isn't quite the right fit, is it? It's less about consistency and more about effectiveness.
How good are we at making decisions?
Yeah. Basically.
Yeah.
Are processes leading us to sound judgments, generally speaking?
And this connects to the idea of us being cognitive misers. I like that term.
It's very descriptive, coined by researchers like Fisk and Taylor. The idea is thinking deeply takes effort. It uses up mental energy.
Like cognitive resources.
Exactly. And we often try to conserve those resources. So instead of deep, complex analysis for every single choice,
We take shortcuts.
we often take mental shortcuts, yeah. The easier route, like, relying on gut feelings or simple rules of thumb, rather than weighing every pro and con meticulously.
Because it's just easier, less demanding.
It's more efficient in a way, even if it's not always the most accurate path.
And just like memory, our decisions aren't made in a vacuum, right? Biases come in.
Oh, definitely. Our social background, our culture, our own personal beliefs and inclinations, they all feed into the process. They shape the shortcuts we take and the conclusions we jump to, often without us really noticing.
The source mentions these cognitive shortcuts and biases will be explored more later, which is good to know. But for now, the main point seems to be that our decision-making, like our memory, isn't foolproof. It's prone to these shortcuts and influences.
That's a perfect summary. So if we pull it all together from this deep dive, memory isn't a recording, it's reconstructive, open to change.
Yeah.
Our emotions matter, they impact how we think and remember.
Right.
And we often act as cognitive misers, taking mental shortcuts in both memory and decision-making, which makes us vulnerable to biases.
And that Lost in the Mall study really drove home how even false memories can potentially be created through suggestion.
It really did, even if we still have questions about why some people seem more prone to it than others.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening, given everything we've talked about, the limits, the malleability of memory, the shortcuts in decisions, how should knowing this change how you take in information or make judgments, or even just trust your own gut feelings and recollections day to day?
Yeah, how does this understanding maybe shift things for you moving forward? It's definitely something worth thinking about. Maybe even looking into cognitive biases a bit more on your own. It's a fascinating area.